Party, Keir Starmer, responding to that EHCR report.
And thoroughly professional report. When the Commission was set up by the last Labour government to tackle discrimination, promote equality and protect human rights, it never occurred to me or anyone else that one day the Labour Party would be investigated for breaching the equality legislation that a Labour government had introduced. Worse still, that the Labour Party would be found to have committed unlawful acts under that same legislation. But that's what this report finds, both in terms of unlawful harassment through the acts of our agents and unlawful indirect discrimination. The report's conclusions are clear and stark. They leave no room for equivocation. The report finds serious failings in leadership, processes and culture in dealing with anti-Semitism within our party. Specific examples of unlawful harassment and unlawful indirect discrimination. Clear examples of political interference from the leader's office in anti-Semitism cases. An inadequate process for handling complaints of anti-Semitism, a failure to deliver adequate training for staff responsible for investigating cases, repeated failure to implement the recommendations of previous reports into anti-Semitism, a culture that is, and I quote, at odds with the Labour Party's commitment to zero tolerance of anti-Semitism. And perhaps most telling of all, a clear breakdown of trust between the Labour Party, many of its members, and the Jewish community. I found this report hard to read, and it is a day of shame for the Labour Party. We have failed Jewish people, our members, our supporters, and the British public. And so, on behalf of the Labour Party, I am truly sorry for all the pain and grief that has been caused. To Jewish people, our Jewish members, our long-standing Jewish affiliate JLM, to the people driven out of our party, the Jewish members driven out of Parliament, including Louise Ellman and Luciana Berger, and to the members of the Labour Party staff who spoke out. I want to say this. I know how hard these last few years have been for you, how painful today will be, and how hard you had to fight to have your voices heard. So let me be clear. I hear you, and I can promise you this. I will act. Never again will Labour let you down. Never again will we fail to tackle anti-Semitism. And never again will we lose your trust. The Labour Party I lead accepts this report in full and without qualification. We will implement all the recommendations and we will implement them in full. That process starts today. I've already instructed my staff to start work with the Commission to implement the recommendations at the earliest possible opportunity. We will provide the Commission with our action plan to achieve all of this within 6 weeks. We will establish an independent complaints process, and it will be in place as soon as possible in the new year. We will ensure that neither the leader, the deputy leader, or our offices will have any involvement in the outcome of complaints initiated under the Labour Party processes. And we are already addressing the backlog of anti-Semitism cases. In fact, there have been more cases completed in the last 6 months than in the whole of 2019. But we will go much further, and we must go further, because, as the report makes clear, this cannot be solved just by changing the party's processes and structures. We also need a culture change in the Labour Party. It must become once again, an open and welcoming place for people from all backgrounds and all communities. Under my leadership, zero tolerance of anti-Semitism will mean precisely that. If you're anti-Semitic, you should be nowhere near this party, and we'll make sure you're not. And if, after all the pain, all the grief, and all the evidence in this report, there are still those who think there's no problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that it's all exaggerated or a factional attack, then frankly, you are part of the problem too, and you should be nowhere near the Labour Party either. This report is painful to read, but I urge everyone to do so, because this must be a line in the sand. There could be no more missed opportunities, no more denials or excuses. Under my leadership, Labour will act decisively against anti-Semitism in all its forms. We will repair the breach. I know it will take time and hard work, but when I stood for leader of this party, I was clear that my first priority would be to root out anti-Semitism and rebuild trust. That started in April. We've made progress, and it will intensify today. But I will only consider it a success when those members who left our party because of anti-Semitism feel safe to return, and when we no longer hear the words Labour and anti-Semitism in the same sentence. Thank you. I think we are now going to questions, and I think we have Vicky from the BBC first, please. Vicky.
Keir Starmer, you have apologised today on behalf of the Labour Party. What about a personal apology? You sat in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet for years. Why didn't you speak out more publicly when you knew what Labour MPs were saying about anti-Semitism? And do you think that Jeremy Corbyn and the staff in his office should stay in the Labour Party?
Vicky, I spoke out, as you know, both in the shadow cabinet and outside the shadow cabinet. That's a matter of record on issues such as the international definition and the rule changes we needed. But we all have to accept the findings in this report. We all have to accept responsibility. And that is why my first act as leader of the party on the 4th of April, I apologised unreservedly for the anti-Semitism, and I do so again today. We all need to understand the hurt and pain that's been caused by this. Thank you. Can we now go to ITV? I think Libby. I think you need to unmute. Libby, we can't hear you. You're muted, I think. I still can't hear you, I'm afraid. Libby, you may be muted still?
Yes. You hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. We got you.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Keir Starmer, do you think that your predecessor was ever fit to be leader of the Labour Party? And do you think that he still has a place in the party now? And can I also ask on the issue of the latest figures on the spread of coronavirus, is it time for a national lockdown? Well,
Libby, the report doesn't make individual findings about Jeremy Corbyn. It has strong findings about a collective failure of leadership. We all need to understand that. We all need to accept that and act on the recommendations. And that's what I'll be doing, working with the Commission, as we have done in the last 6 months. So that's the approach I will take. On the numbers of infections, I think across the country, everybody is very concerned by the rising number of cases and, tragically, by the rising number of deaths. That is why I called for a circuit break that could have coincided with half-term. My concern is that the tier system is not doing enough to bring the infection rate down. And that's why I say again to the Prime Minister, he needs to go further and faster to get control of the virus. Thank you. Can we go to Kate, I think, at Sky? Kate.
Mr. Starmer, you've just said, after all the pain, all the grief and all the evidence in this report, there are still those who think there's no problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that it's all exaggerated or a factional attack. Then frankly, you are part of the problem too, and you should be nowhere near the Labour Party either. Given you've just said that, And given that Jeremy Corbyn, in a statement, has just said that the scale of anti-Semitism was, quote, dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents, what are you going to do now to show that you are serious and that Jeremy Corbyn has no place in or near the Labour Party?
Kate, I'll look carefully at what Jeremy Corbyn has said in full. But I've said a moment ago, and I'll say it again, those that deny there's a problem are part of the problem. Those that pretend it's exaggerated or factional are part of the problem. And under my leadership, we will have zero tolerance of anti-Semitism. Under my leadership, we will accept this report in full, recognise the hurt that's been caused, and act on the recommendations with speed. Thank you, Kate. Can I go to, I think, LBC, Ben? Ben.
Thank you, Sir Keir. Many people in the Jewish community will welcome what you've said today, but many more will feel it doesn't go far enough. This is a highly damning report that finds the previous leadership of the party you now lead broke the law, was acted unlawfully in 3 ways. MPs, members, other affiliates have been disciplined, have faced disciplinary action for far less. So as the current leader, do you want to see that route utilised for people who said this was manufactured by Israel, to quote one trade union leader, for the people who were found to have unlawfully interfered in the complaints process, and for the MPs, the former party leader, who were ultimately responsible for what the EHRC found was a huge and unlawful, indeed, failure of leadership?
Ben, on how far we've gone, we have taken action in the last 6 months since I took over as leader of the Labour Party. We will now take action on this report. We will fully implement all of the recommendations and we will do it speedily. But I recognise the challenge is also about the culture of the Labour Party, and we're determined to take up that challenge as well. And that is why we will continue to take action against those that are anti-Semitic in our party. They shouldn't be in the Labour Party, and we intend to make sure that they aren't. Thank you, Ben. Channel 4, I think, Liz. Liz.
Yes, so this is a report that has found that the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, oversaw a period of discrimination and harassment against Jewish people. You say you want the Jewish community to trust you. You need to throw him out of the party, don't you?
Well, Liz, there weren't individual findings against Jeremy Corbyn. There was a collective failure of leadership. That's the clear finding and the painful finding in this report. The Commission have been clear about what they think the appropriate action is. They've set it out in terms in the recommendations. I intend to implement all of those recommendations, to implement them swiftly, and to tackle the culture change that needs to happen under in our party. And that's the leadership I intend to show on this. Thank you. I think we're going to the Jewish Telegraph. Is it Adam? Yep. Adam.
Hi. While you've said there were no individual findings in the report for certain cases, it did state in the report that certain investigations into Jeremy Corbyn were actually blocked. Will you be re-looking at those cases? And if those cases find what everyone in the Jewish media expects, will you be then calling for him to resign?
Adam, we'll look at all cases, and part of the challenge has been to speed up the process with the cases that are already in the pipeline. And we've done a lot of work in the last 6 months to speed that process up. As I said a moment ago, more cases have been determined in the last 6 months than were determined in the whole of 2019, and more actually than were determined in the years 2014 to 2018 combined. So we will look at all of the cases. We need to make sure they are dealt with quickly, fairly and efficiently, and we absolutely need to speed up the process. Thank you. I think Lee from the Jewish Chronicle is next.
Thank you.
Hi.
Some suggest you only started to take action against anti-Semitism once you became leader, and that you did little and stood by when Corbyn was in charge. Can I ask what support you gave to Luciana Berger when she left the party in February 2019? How many times did you speak to her, and when did you last speak to her as she left the party?
Lee, thank you. I mean, I'm on record for having spoken out on anti-Semitism, as I say, both inside the shadow cabinet and outside the shadow cabinet. So that's a matter of record. And I have spoken to a number of people who left our party, and I actually spoke to Luciana last night. So thank you for that. Justin, I think.
The first time?
Justin, I think, from the Jewish Chronicle. From the Jewish News, I'm sorry. Justin.
Hi, Keir.
Jewish News, I'm sorry, yeah.
Would you welcome back Luciana, Louise, and also Ian Austin and others who left the party specifically because of anti-Semitism?
Well, I can't speak for them, but I do. The test I've set for myself is effectively when they and others feel that it's safe to return to the Labour Party. And I think it was a couple of days after Louise Ellman left, I had that private discussion with her and gave her my commitment then to do everything I could to ensure the Labour Party was a place that she felt she could return to. I can't speak for her. I hope that she and others will take comfort from the steps we've taken in the last 6 months and take comfort from the steps that we will take as a result of this report. But I am under no illusion. I will be judged by what I do, not by what I say. And so, as I say, the test for me is not just the structural changes, the rule changes. All of that's got to happen and process. It's when the Labour Party is a place that those that have left feel they can safely return to. Thank you, Justin.
But you'd like to see all those people I mentioned back?
Well, as I say, I can't speak for them. They will make their own decisions. I want to ensure that they feel that the Labour Party is a safe place for them to return to, if that's what they choose to do. Thank you. I think we're going to Israel Radio with Jerry. Jerry.
Thank you. You've just said that there's no place in the party for those with anti-Semitic views. Precisely what are you going to do with Jeremy Corbyn and his henchmen, Carrie Murphy and Seamus Milne? The Commission have said very clearly it's not something they can deal with. And judging by Corbyn's comments just earlier, he doesn't seem to get it. Will you expel him or discipline him? And finally, what will you do for the Jewish community who've been abused, they've been bruised and worse? They still want those responsible dealt with. Well, precisely how? When?
Jerry, obviously, like you, we've gone carefully through the report. There are not individual findings against the individuals you named. There's a collective finding of a failure of leadership, and we need to understand that, accept that, understand the hurt and grief, as you rightly point out, that's been experienced by Jewish people as a result of the failure of the Labour Party to tackle this issue in recent years. But there weren't individual findings against Jeremy and others. It is incumbent on all of us to accept the findings, all of us to act on the recommendations, and all of us, including myself, to apologise, as I've done today and have done previously. Thank you, Jerry. Alini, I think, from the Times.
Hi, thanks.
Hi.
So, Keir,
I've got a bit of an echo.
You've committed to... Sorry.
No, don't worry, I can hear you.
You committed to introducing a fully independent complaint system, but that would require a change to the party's rule book, and that requires a party conference. How and when are you going to ensure that that takes place?
Alini, as soon as possible, and we've discussed that very thing with the Commission, which is how far we can go, what rules we may need to change. I am determined we'll do it as quickly as possible. I'm determined we can do it early next year, but it's one of the issues that, as you would expect, I've been talking to the Commission about and will continue to talk to them about. But the commitment to an independent process is very, very firm. We will have an independent process in place, and the sooner the better. We will work with the Commission to get that up and running just as quickly as possible. Thank you. I think we've got Harry from The Telegraph.
Thank you, Sir Keir. Just to press you, the EHRC found a specific example of Lotto interfering in a complaint against Jeremy Corbyn in 2018 relating to the anti-Semitic mural in Tower Hamlets. Can you specifically say whether you believe that complaint should be revisited? And do you personally think that Mr Corbyn's defence of that mural was anti-Semitic?
Well, there's no defence of that mural. I've said that before and I'll say it happily again, or a defence of the comments. Harry, on the individual cases, I'm not going to fall into the trap of saying which one should be looked at again, how and when. That's precisely the sort of interference that has caused so much difficulty in the past. We have put a lot of work into the governance and legal unit in the way these cases are handled. That's why we've got through so many cases in the last 6 months. So the team will look at them. It's right that they do so. We will have an independent process in place. But whilst I must have a line of sight on that, it is very important for me not to pick out individual cases and give an indication as to what I think should or shouldn't happen. That's, I think, a big part of the problem in relation to that part of the report. Can I go to Andy, I think, at the Independent?
Hello. You've correctly said, Sir Keir, that the report today doesn't make individual findings of wrongdoing by Jeremy Corbyn, but the EHRC have just said to us that it's not within their remit to investigate individual allegations against individual people. That is the responsibility of the party. So clearly the responsibility for investigating things like the complaint about the mural rests with the party and not with the EHRC. How can Jewish people have confidence in you if you're unable to say clearly that in that case about the mural and in any other cases which relate to Jeremy Corbyn, those will be among the ones which are looked at by the party? And could I also ask, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn is personally anti-Semitic?
Look, Andy, those cases are for us to investigate. Of course they are. I was simply making the observation that there aren't individual findings in relation to the report. And there are no, let me be clear, there are no cases that shouldn't be looked at all. I will leave it to the team to look at all of those cases. I'm just not going to pick out individual cases and suggest what should or shouldn't happen. But yes, it's our responsibility to look at all cases that are brought to our attention and indeed to see whether there are cases out there that aren't necessarily brought to our attention. That is our responsibility and we will discharge it. There is no finding in relation to anti-Semitism against Jeremy Corbyn in the report. I think that's clear. It is a collective failure of leadership. It's a very serious collective failure of leadership. That's why I take it so seriously and why I intend to implement these recommendations as quickly as possible. Thank you all very much.
So it's Keir Starmer there, the Labour leader. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader there, concluding that rather brief news conference following the EHRC report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, where they're very clear that there's a case to answer. They're demanding a response from the Labour Party. They have the legal power to do that. And Sir Keir has said they will implement the findings of the report in full. Well, with me is our correspondent, Kate McCann, one of those who asked the question in that session. So what does that mean the Labour Party have got to do?
Well, there is a list of recommendations in this report, but really the key one is that independent complaints process, and that's what Sir Keir Starmer was saying he would have in place as soon as possible in the early part of next year. And the reason for that is because one of the key findings of this report is that there was political interference in the complaints process and that ultimately members of the team in the leader's office were going in, looking at complaints and perhaps even making recommendations or suggestions about how they should be handled. More than 20 times, it says. More than 23 times in 70 different complaints that were looked at. So that's only of the 70 that they looked at in this report. It may well have been happening more widespread than that. So this independent process is designed to address that issue. There are also some pretty significant questions about the training that staff were getting in terms of how to deal with these complaints and whether it has been enough in the past and actually since a number of other reports have found that Labour was lacking in this area. One of the interesting things about this report is that it says while Labour has committed under Sir Keir Starmer to do more, not enough is being done at the moment in terms of complaints. And another recommendation from this report that will be welcomed, of course, by many in the Jewish community is that the party has to engage with Jewish stakeholders to develop a clear, accessible and robust principle and practice to tackle anti-Semitism and instill confidence for the future. And that's one of the things that Sir Keir was saying. This is about trying to get a culture change, a change in behaviour. And he said that he won't feel that there's been success after this report until those members who left the party originally feel able to come back.
Now, it's Keir Starmer, who, let us not forget, was the head Director of Public Prosecutions, making it clear that this is not an indictment document, that it criticises the Labour Party and the Labour leadership in general, not individuals. You were asking about Jeremy Corbyn. He's also put out a statement today. Why is there a case against Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, in the statement that Jeremy Corbyn has put out today, there's a very clear question for Sir Keir Starmer, because while he goes on in this to say that anti-Semitism is abhorrent and welcomes the report, although not in full. Mr Corbyn actually says one anti-Semite is one too many, but the scale of the problem was also dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party, as well as by much of the media. Now, the reason that that's interesting is because in this pretty hefty report, one of the individuals that is picked up on is a councillor, Labour councillor called Pam Bromley. And in this report, there are 2 pages dedicated here to the conduct of what she put on Facebook. And a big part of that, the report finds, is suggesting that complaints of anti-Semitism are fake or smears. And there's some examples of posts that she put up saying that anti-Semitism complaints were made to undermine the Labour Party and they were amplified by the media because the media didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. Now, that seems very similar to what Mr Corbyn is saying in this statement. So there's a legitimate question now for Sir Keir Starmer. If he accepts this report in full, why does he not do something or sanction Mr Corbyn for saying something which is very similar?
Even expel him from the Labour Party.
Well, he can withdraw the whip, of course. That is something that is open to Sir Keir Starmer. And I think the frustration from members of the Jewish community and actually members of the Labour Party have already had a number of texts from Labour MPs who are frustrated by Sir Keir's answers there, because they feel that he is, in a way, hiding behind the fact that this report was never going to be able to find against Jeremy Corbyn because it wasn't in the scope of it. It is actually for him, as the current leader of the Labour Party, to decide what happens to current Labour members. And, of course, he said in answer to those questions there that he would look very carefully at Mr Corbyn's statement, which, by the way, was actually put out quite some time before Sir Keir stood up to speak, so he probably would have had time to read it. But there is a question about whether or not he will sanction Jeremy Corbyn personally. Now, you and I both know that that would be a hugely political thing to do, but if Sir Keir is serious about changing the culture of the party and showing people that he is determined to root out anti-Semitism, then there will be some people who see this as a red line.
I mean, is there really an active possibility that the former leader of the Labour Party could have the whip withdrawn, which would mean he couldn't stand again, for example, for the Labour Party election, although he's quite an old man already?
Well, it's always possible. I mean, Sir Keir has just stood up and said at that press conference that no complaint shouldn't be investigated. So if anyone wanted to bring a complaint about Jeremy Corbyn's conduct to the Labour Party under the new independence complaint process, then it would be investigated.
So do we know now that the Labour Party, using this independent process, is going to investigate a number of individuals and that could result in expulsions or withdrawal of the whip?
We don't know anything about this independent complaints process yet formally. What we do know is that there are many, many outstanding complaints of anti-Semitism against the party and other complaints too, which will now probably go into this independent investigation process that Sir Keir Starmer is setting up. There is a huge backlog of complaints which the party has to get through, and no doubt they will fall under this new process because that would, of course, make the most sense. The party has to act quickly. It's stipulated in this report that it does have to act quickly on those complaints. But I think this outstanding issue, the political side of it, with Mr Corbyn being a former leader, and also the big questions about what he said today in this statement, will hang over Sir Keir Starmer until he takes some action, or at least makes some comment on it. I think at the moment he's issued what we call a holding response, if you like. He said, I'll have a look at what Jeremy Corbyn said, but there will be pressure on him to say something today on what Mr Corbyn's future in the party might be.
I mean, it's interesting that Jeremy Corbyn talks about us and he talks about enemies within the Labour Party in his statement. So this is going to be very divisive, isn't it? I mean, they're going to be people who were supporters of Jeremy Corbyn and Corbynism are going to be very unhappy about all this.
They will be, and they already are. There have been a couple of people who were very senior in Jeremy Corbyn's team already trying to set the record straight before the publication of this report. That's the case for both sides. This is, of course, an incredibly difficult situation for any party to be in. It's really emotive. It's caused a number of very senior Labour MPs to feel that they had no other option but to leave the Labour Party. That's a huge problem for Keir Starmer.
So what happens now?
Well, the next part of this process is that Sir Keir will implement this long list of recommendations, and he will have to do that to a timeline which has been set out in this report. And, of course...
It's by early next year, isn't it?
I think it's actually earlier than that. I think it's in December. I think 6 weeks, I think it is. I have so many pieces of paper in front of me. I'll check the date and get back to you, but I think it's 6 weeks. And then this complaints procedure will be in place early next year. And, of course, the party will go through this report with a fine-tooth comb. And, as we said, there will be a backlog of complaints that they will need to get through. And some of this, too, will be about trying to change that culture, whether that is through training or trying to help people better understand why this issue has arisen in the first place.
And who pays for all this?
It's a very good question. Presumably the Labour Party. They will be the ones who will have to instate this new independent team. And presumably there will have to be the funding from the party's central office to do that.
Kate McCann, thank you very much indeed. The latest there on the report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Now, in other news, there's a warning that the United Kingdom is facing a critical stage of the second virus wave and that current measures to curb the virus are